All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to jump into an article by Ying Sheng that really gets to the theological heart of Reverend Jonathan Chow's vision for the Chinese church. And it's a vision that is built, from the ground up, entirely around the gospel of Jesus Christ.
So, let's kick things off with the one question that really fueled Jonathan Chow's entire ministry. Why is salvation even necessary? I mean, think about it. If people don't feel like they need the gospel, then preaching it is kind of pointless, right? For Chow, this was the absolute non-negotiable starting point.
Well, to get to that answer, Chow says we have to start with the biblical view of humanity and the problem of sin. He saw this as the foundation, not just for understanding salvation, but for any effective evangelism. You really have to understand the problem before you can ever appreciate the solution.
So for Chow, sin isn't just, a simple mistake or a flaw. No, he saw it as a direct, conscious rebellion. He points all the way back to the story of Adam, who knew exactly what God's will was, but deliberately chose to disobey. And that single act of rebellion, well, it set the pattern for all of us.
Now, this slide highlights a really interesting and, frankly, important distinction in Chow's theology. He followed a Reformed view, which taught that Adam's guilt was imputed to us. Okay, what does that mean? Think of it this way. Adam acted as humanity's representative, kind of like an ambassador for all of us. So, we face the consequences, not because we've somehow biologically inherited his sin, but because we, as the people he represented, follow his pattern and choose to rebel ourselves.
And the fallout from this rebellion? I mean, it's absolutely catastrophic. According to Chow's teaching, this wasn't some minor hiccup. It fundamentally altered the very fabric of our nature. It completely fractured the relationship between God and humanity, and it placed everyone and everything under the inescapable power and penalty of sin. And that penalty is death.
Now, to help us kind of wrap our heads around this feeling of helplessness, the article's author, Ying Sheng, brings in a supplementary view from a 20th century theologian named Reinhold Niebuhr. So it's really important to note, this next part isn't from Chow himself, but it's a modern lens the author uses to help us connect with these big ideas.
So Niebuhr argued that sin pops up from this fundamental tension that we all live with. See, we're kind of stuck, right? We've got these finite physical bodies that have limits, but our spirits, our minds, they can imagine anything. They're free and transcendent. This conflict between what we are and what we can imagine ourselves to be creates this deep, gnawing anxiety. And our temptation is to try and escape that anxiety by elevating ourselves, by denying our limitations. And that act, Niebuhr says, is pride. That's the root of sin.
And what's so brilliant about this is how it shows that pride isn't just one thing. It has all these different faces, right? There's the pride of power, where we try to control everything to feel secure. There's intellectual pride, where our opinions become the absolute truth. There's moral pride, where we basically become our own standard of what's good. And then, the most subtle one, spiritual pride, where we actually start to mistake our own standards for God's.
So, here's the bottom line. Whether you're looking at it from Jonathan Chow's theology or Niebuhr's modern analysis, the takeaway is exactly the same. Humans, caught in this web of sin and pride, are fundamentally helpless to save themselves. No amount of self-reliance or trying harder is going to fix the root problem.
Okay, so if that's the problem, and it's a big one, what's the solution? If we can't save ourselves, where does help come from? Well, for Chow, the answer is found entirely and exclusively in the work of Jesus Christ.
And you can hear it right from the man himself. Chow makes this crystal clear. Christ's mission was twofold. First, to free us from the power of sin that holds us captive, and second, to pay the penalty for our rebellion, which was death. In short, he took our place.
And this right here, this is the absolute core of the Protestant faith that Chow is so passionate about, justification by faith. It's this radical belief that we are made right with God, not because of our good deeds or our moral efforts or our religious rituals, but simply by trusting in what Christ has already done for us.
And Chow was super clear about this. This isn't just some vague, I believe in something kind of faith. No, it has a concrete object. It's a complete trust in the person of Jesus, that he is the Son of God, and in the work of Jesus, that his death on the cross paid our debt, and that he is the King who will one day return.
So why does all this deep theology actually matter? And more specifically, what does it mean in the context of Chinese culture? This is where the rubber really meets the road, and Chow's theological vision becomes incredibly practical.
The author of the article, Ying Sheng, brings up a really interesting point, a kind of cultural friction. In a culture that so often values pragmatism, hard work, and self-reliance, Why would a gospel based on a free gift, something you absolutely cannot earn, be such a difficult concept to accept? And this slide, wow, it just lays it out perfectly. It shows the two completely different mindsets you can have. On one side, you have the true gospel of grace. It's all about Christ, and it's a totally free gift. But on the other side, there's this constant temptation to slide into what you could call a utilitarian faith. And this is a self-centered approach that sees religion as a transaction. I do my part by praying and going to church, and in return, a deity helps solve my problems or gives me a better life. And Yingshan's article points out the real danger in this way of thinking. It can lead to a faith that's basically just a form of superstition. Jesus isn't seen as a savior to be worshipped, but more like a particularly efficacious or powerful deity that we can use to get worldly advantages. And you know what happens, right? When the miracles stop or life gets hard, that kind of faith just evaporates.
And this, right here, brings us to what might be Jonathan Chow's most critical point for the church. The true benefit of the gospel isn't a more comfortable life or healing or prosperity or any other worldly advantage. The ultimate benefit, the prize, the entire goal of salvation is Christ himself. A relationship with him is the end goal, not just a means to get something else.
So that leaves us with this final really sharp question to think about. A question that Chow's theology kind of forces us to ask ourselves. In our own lives, do we view faith as a tool we use to get what we want? Or is knowing and being united with Christ the ultimate goal, in and of itself?